Okay, so now we have Claire, who is going to present a very interesting project about African American historiography, a French project, which I thought would be interesting for American scholars who might already know about it.
So, a short presentation. The anthology I'm going to speak about is part of a larger project, a 3-year granted project called Writing History from the Margins, the Case of African Americans. And it was a collaboration basically between 3 Paris universities, or Paris and the suburbs, and then it became much larger. Enlarged. I mean, the team is now quite large. So we got what in France we would call some serious money, which is not that common. And so the project was scheduled, from 2013 to 2016, but it actually only ended. So the money ended in 2016. But the project actually ended not that long ago, because the last publications connected with the project came out, and that's one of the last ones, came out in December 2018. So what did we have in mind? First, we wanted to explore how being located at the margins of their society, of academia, but also of the publishing world, led African American historians to be pioneers in a number of ways. We subsequently enlarged that initial project, that focused on African American historians. We enlarged it to historians from other margins of empire, but also women historians, etc., etc. So the first project, the African American side of the project was, is to be found in Writing History from the Margins, which was published by Routledge in 2016, and the latest publication, Histoire en Marche, which enlarges to other historians located at the margins. We also wanted to introduce to a French audience 2 types of documents that they were not necessarily familiar with. The first type of document is American slave narratives. Not very many of those slave narratives have been translated into French, and Marie-Jeanne and I co-edit a collection at the Presse Universitaire de Rouen et du Havre. So those are 2 university presses located in Normandy, and the Normandy area has been very, very active over the past decade or decades in uncovering its slave past, and they subsidize the collection. 4 volumes have come out so far, and a 5th volume is not in press, but almost. We initially wanted to produce a biographical dictionary of African American historians and an anthology, and we found out that, in terms of time, we didn't have time to do it. It was too ambitious, and so we decided to focus instead on an anthology that I'm going to show you now. The anthology is called Écrire l'histoire depuis les marges, une anthologie d'historiens africains-américains, 1855-1965. Now, when we think of anthologies, we usually tend to think of literary anthologies, even though we know there are other kinds, but usually we think of literary anthologies. And when you look, I checked in various dictionaries, and the literary component always comes first, okay? So really literary, but we know that the format has been used for history also in France, and also in the United States for various domains of history. But literary anthologies are far more common. In a book called Passed into Print, print historian Leslie Howsam notes that, quote, the intellectual culture of the historical discipline has been inimical to recontextualizing the work of its forebears. And she basically says that because teachers tend to encourage their students to read the latest historical works rather than past historians, quote, older works of history have been neglected, seldom valued as literature, and not often collected as artifacts. And the reason for that, of course, is that older works of history are superseded by newer works, which is unsurprising, but also that new research is supposed to be more innovative. And I think that part of the interest of our anthology is that it shows how pioneering African American historians have been, and how their position at the margin led them to innovate in their sources, in the scope of their works, but also in how you could get works published at a time when you were basically outside the mainstream book trade. So who is in the anthology? Whether in history or literature, editing an anthology inevitably raises questions of who gets included and who gets left out. Our anthology includes 11 African American historians, only 2 women, but that reflects the state of the field for a very long time, very few women. And of course, if you go down the list, you might be struck by a very conspicuous absence, that of Carter Woodson. And when we presented the anthology at the conference of the African American Intellectual History Society in March, that's what our chair, W.E.B, told us. And in a recent review of the work by Nicolas Martin-Rothot, he also remarks on the absence, and that's a very conspicuous absence, if you think about it, of the someone who's been called the father of Black history. So, what's our justification? Well, we weren't really trying to, we couldn't include all historians. We know that anthologies are basically canon-making enterprises, but we didn't set out to do anything, to write a kind of canon. And basically what we tried to do was present a representative sample, or what was for us a representative sample of Black historians. But you have to realize that this choice is really influenced by what or who we're working with at the time. So basically it's our own tastes that dictated, the tastes dictated the choice. Right, so this can be criticized, obviously, but that's the way we worked. So this anthology, this is the way it works. As you can see, you have texts. Yes, here, for example, you have, no, I think this one, okay, right, sorry, Marjan. Okay, so you have a translation into French. So those texts, I should say, had never been translated into French before, right? So translations with a number of notes, and whenever it's possible, when the works are in the public domain, you've got a link to the original text, so you can read it in English if you want to. All right, and so as I said, a number of links, and if I, okay, right, so let's take, for example, this one. So Du Bois, you said, but okay. So here we have again the note, and then each of the texts is accompanied with an essay, which basically recontextualizes the work of the historian, gives a short biography, and also shows the kind of sources that he or she used, how he or she was pioneering in the field. And I think something else that the anthology does, which is not that common, is attempt to systematically investigate the publishing history of the works, which is really part of the story of those works. Each essay has a bibliography, as you can see here, and we tried both in the texts and in the essays to have as many links as we could. So sometimes we tried to have as many links as we could in French, because this is for a French audience. Sometimes it's impossible, and so you have links to, English, American websites. It would be particularly interesting to know how many people access the anthology and use it, for what purposes. So to have an idea of the reception of the work. We know that popular reception is extremely difficult to assess. It's always been a problem, especially for book historians. So according to the publishers, their main website receives about 400,000 visits a year, and I'm no specialist, so I have no idea whether that's a good figure, a high figure or not. So I have no idea what exactly it means, but it seems that assessing the number of visits for individual publications is very difficult. So that they haven't been able to do, so we really don't know. And another thing that I'd like to point out is that referencing is a bit of a problem. The work isn't referenced in the French National Library. It's not referenced on WorldCat. And it seems that it's a problem with this kind of publication. It's a bit of a pity, because to be visible, okay, you've got social media, etc., but it's a pity that it's not referenced. So, as a conclusion, so two things that are rather obvious. First, the interest of collaborations. It's really, really, I mean, it's obvious, but it doesn't happen that often in French academia, except perhaps in the hard sciences. So that's something that I wanted to point out. Another thing that I wanted to point out, although here again it's pretty obvious, is the importance of money. If we hadn't had the grant, maybe we would still have done a number of things. It would have taken us much longer. We might have get discouraged in the process. Finally, I'd like to say that a new project is in the works. It's an anthology of Black intellectuals in a slightly different format. It will involve many researchers of the original team and others too. Marie-Jeanne is the principal investigator, so she will be the person to talk to. If you have questions about it later on the Q&A.